The Yonkos versus the Admirals. This is without a doubt the biggest debate in the One Piece community, and after further research and having new opinions on certain things and obviously new metas being made, I've realized that the topic isn't as close as I thought, and initially I thought they were just relative and then I stand the Admirals for a bit, but now I have a whole different viewpoint on the topic. And like how the other versus matches are explaining why it's a stomp or not as close as you think, here's as to why the Yonkos are above the Admirals. And I know everyone's gonna be crying, but Tyler, didn't you say the Admirals? Bro, I can change my opinion, stay mad. Now for the first argument we are going to be getting into, it's Whitebeard being the quote-unquote strongest at Marineford, which isn't the case. Despite having meds beforehand that allowed him to sustain a majority of his strength, though he should still be below his prime self based off the Ace novels, which apparently during the 100 battles with Ace and Whitebeard, Whitebeard was declining in power. And in Marineford, Whitebeard intentionally just threw his life out on the line and was on a suicide mission, and he removes the one thing keeping him stabilized, which might have allowed him to evade his soldier when he stabs him, but you might be able to make the case that Whitebeard let this happen. Regardless of this though, he'd get injured and sustain multiple injuries while still performing pretty well against Akainu, who is quote-unquote holding back to protect Marineford, but even if this is a nerfed Akainu, these nerfs don't really compare to anything that Whitebeard sustains throughout the entire arc, which Akainu literally takes advantage of during a panel, and despite this, Whitebeard still knocks him out temporarily. This Whitebeard is enraged, but he'd be nowhere near himself before removing his life support because you can't prove that. And with Whitebeard established to be nerfed even if he was quote-unquote the strongest pirate in Marineford, which is really just based on a title that he got before this event, and is sort of like Kaido's the world's strongest creature statement, which really isn't valid, it's just sort of a title for him. And even if Whitebeard was at the peak of pirates, Marineford Whitebeard certainly wasn't. And now this would lead into my next argument, that being Kaido and Big Mom being relatively above the 3 Admirals at Marineford. Now I used to use a guidebook that initially had the translation of a single Admiral being relatively below the 2 Yonkos, which I would upscale the Admirals with, but after going through multiple translations for said guide, it's clear that it's in reference to all 3 Admirals, especially since we see a picture of all 3 of them in the full guide. Kaido and Big Mom by the beginning of Rooftop are relatively above them, and they would go on to get multiple amps during the arc, and so even if the Admirals were holding back a Marineford or even got stronger during the time skip, Kaido and Big Mom with this statement should just slightly outdo them. And along with Big Mom getting those soul amps and Kaido just getting stronger during his battle with Luffy, I think Akainu versus Big Mom is an extreme diff fight regardless of who you have, but it's clear that Kaido would outclass any of the 3 Admirals. And then Fujitora and Green Bull are just obviously weaker than all of them, so it doesn't really matter. And this would then lead into the next argument, that being Shanks Whitebeard and Blackbeard upscaling from Kaido and Big Mom's feats. Shanks is able to literally blitz Akainu, who is relative to Kaido regardless of what you say, and he's also able to blitz Kizaru in Film Red, which despite not being canon shouldn't really contradict any previous scaling since he blitzed Akainu beforehand, and he also made Green Bull shit his pants. Plus scales to a healthier and more powerful Whitebeard, so he should be able to just outdo the Admirals in the first place. As for Blackbeard, it's a little more interesting to talk about his scaling since he's a little more vague, but we know he's apparently the strongest with both Devil Fruits, and he is able to at least bully Marco, who is able to react to the Admirals at least in speed. I do think the Admirals would beat up Marco in a fight obviously, but Marco does scale to them somewhat in speed. And if this were the case, this means Blackbeard would also scale to them in speed, which means he could just negate them with his Darkness Fruit and then wipe them out with the Gura Gura. And as for the final argument, which I did briefly mention because of Marco, that being the Yonko commanders unironically being able to press Admirals. Now I don't think Marco could really beat any of the 3 Admirals if I'm being real. Like, the best thing he does is kick Kizaru, which Kizaru takes no damage from. However, it is important to note that Marco and even a crippled Ace are able to react to Admirals, and then you also have Ben Beckman specifically apparently being able to scare Kizaru, which is confirmed in the Film Red databook, and apparently has a presence comparable to that of the Admirals and makes them very wary of him. Again, I don't think Marco really scales to the Admirals in like AP or durability, but I do think he has some speed scaling to them, which the Yonkos would upscale from, plus Ben specifically is rivaling the Admirals at the very least. And there are other arguments that you could get into, like how the world government apparently thinks that the Shichibukai and the Navy plus the 4 Emperors are the balance of the world, which therefore the 4 Yonko should just be above the 3 Admirals, since it takes the Navy plus the Shichibukai to balance with the 4 Yonkos. But that argument is a little weird because it's more of a narrative perspective. But in conclusion, Kaido and Big Mom, the 2 weakest Yonkos besides Marineford Whitebeard, scale above the 3 Admirals, and they would go on to get stronger during Wano, and Shanks alone has better feats than any of the Admirals, beating some of them individually already. And then if you give Marco that speed scaling to the Admirals plus Ben also scaring Kizaru, Blackbeard is able to just slap any of them outright. And again, Marineford Whitebeard is low-key trash, and he's still able to box up Akainu. A hospitalized Whitebeard speaks on his own as he's near his prime self in strength and would more than likely just wipe the floor with any of the Admirals at Marineford had he been stabilized. To put it simply, the weakest Yonko, Big Mom, or Marineford Whitebeard, whichever of the two, are going in an extreme diff fight with the strongest Admiral, that being Akainu. And the rest of the Yonko would just completely mop the floor with any of the Admirals. Honestly, just throw in the rest of the Navy as well. Not the Shichibukai though, because then they gotta fight Mihawk, the strongest pirate ever.